What happens when a powerful pastor with secrets meets a desperate woman with nothing to lose? Will the truth set them free or destroy everything? Sit back, grab your popcorn, and find out as we dive into this shocking true life story. In a popular city in Nigeria, there was a pastor everyone respected. His name was Pastor John. He led a very popular church, and people came from far and near to hear him preach every Sunday. The church was filled to the brim, with people standing outside just to catch a glimpse of the man of God. When Pastor John spoke, his voice was powerful, and his words seemed to touch every heart. Many believed he had a special connection with God. He prayed for the sick, helped the poor, and blessed couples on their wedding day. But behind closed doors, Pastor John was not the holy man people thought he was. He had secrets, dark secrets that only a few people knew about. One evening, after a midweek service, Pastor John sat in his large office. The room smelled of expensive perfume. A young church worker knocked and entered timidly. "Pastor, the elders want to see you," the young man said, bowing slightly. Pastor John looked up, his smile warm but his eyes cold. "Tell them I will join them soon," he said calmly. When the young man left, Pastor John leaned back in his chair. His phone buzzed, and he picked it up. A text from an unknown number appeared. "God is watching you. Change your ways before it's too late." Pastor John stared at the message for a moment, then smiled to himself. He deleted it and went back to his work. Amaka was a young woman with big dreams. She had recently gotten a job as Pastor John's personal assistant. To many, it seemed like a blessing to work for such a powerful man. But for Amaka, it was just a way to survive. Her mother was sick and needed constant care, and Amaka had to send money home every month. Finding this job felt like a miracle. But she also had a secret. Amaka was HIV positive. It wasn't something she talked about, not even to her closest friends. On her first day at work, Amaka dressed neatly in a plain pink shirt and a blue skirt. She knocked softly on Pastor John's office door. "Come in," his deep voice called out. Amaka entered, her hands slightly trembling. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, forcing a smile. Pastor John looked up and smiled warmly. "Ah, you must be Amaka," he said, standing up to shake her hand. "Welcome to the team. I've heard good things about you." "Thank you, sir," Amaka replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Pastor John gestured for her to sit. "This job will demand a lot from you," he began. "I need someone who is loyal, hardworking, and ready to sacrifice for the work of God. Are you ready for that?" "Yes, sir. I am ready," Amaka said confidently. "Good," Pastor John said, his smile widening. "Here, we are like a family. We protect each other. We trust each other. If you have any issues, feel free to come to me directly." "Okay." "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir," Amaka said again, nodding. As she left his office, Amaka couldn't shake the uneasy feeling she had. Something about Pastor John's smile didn't sit right with her. It was too perfect, too polished, like a mask hiding something underneath. Amaka told herself to focus on the job. She needed the money, and that was all that mattered. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the small voice in her head warning her that this job might cost her more than she was ready to give. The uncomfortable advances. Amaka had been working as Pastor John's assistant for 2 weeks, and everything seemed fine at first. She quickly learned her duties, scheduling meetings, replying to messages, and organizing church events. It was a busy job, but Amaka was determined to do her best. "Amaka, you're doing well," Pastor John said one afternoon as she handed him a file. "Very smart and hardworking. I wish all my staff were like you." "Thank you, sir," Amaka replied, smiling politely. But as the days went by, Amaka began to notice things that didn't feel right. Pastor John complimented her too much. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning when she walked into the office. "That color suits you. I can see you have good taste." "Thank you, sir," Amaka said, though she felt uncomfortable. She wasn't sure if he was just being kind or if there was more to it. One evening, as Amaka was about to leave for the day, Pastor John called her back into his office. "Amaka," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I want us to talk." Amaka sat down slowly, her heart beating a little faster. "Yes, sir." "You've been doing an amazing job," Pastor John began, leaning forward. "You are different. There's something special about you." "Thank you, sir," Amaka said, looking down at her hands. Pastor John continued, "You know, people like you are rare. You're not just hardworking, you're also very beautiful. Do people tell you that often?" Amaka shifted in her seat. "I don't really think about that, sir. I just try to do my work." Pastor John smiled. but his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl. That's good, but you should know your worth. A woman like you deserves to be appreciated. Thank you, sir, Amaka said quickly, standing up. I'll finish the work you gave me before tomorrow. She turned to leave, but Pastor John stopped her. Wait, Amaka. Don't rush off. We're just talking. I hope you feel comfortable around me. You know you can trust me, right? Yes, sir, she said, forcing a smile. As Amaka left the office, she felt a strange mix of emotions. She didn't like how Pastor John was talking to her, but she also didn't want to lose her job. She needed the money to take care of her sick mother. That night, Amaka couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Pastor John's words in her head. You're very beautiful. You deserve to be appreciated. Why is he saying these things? She wondered, is this how he talks to everyone, or is it just me? Amaka decided to ignore it and focus on her work. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. Pastor John's behavior was only the beginning, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. The ultimatum. Amaka sat at her desk, going through files and making sure Pastor John's schedule for the week was organized. It was a quiet afternoon until the intercom buzzed. Amaka, please come to my office, Pastor John's deep voice said. Yes, sir, she replied, gathering her notebook and pen. She walked to his office and knocked lightly before stepping inside. Come in, Amaka. Sit down, Pastor John said with a smile, motioning to the chair across from him. Amaka sat down, her notebook in hand, ready to take notes. But Pastor John didn't speak about work. Instead, he leaned forward and said, Amaka, you know you're special, don't you? She frowned slightly, unsure of where the conversation was going. Thank you, sir, she said cautiously. No, I mean it, Pastor John continued, reaching out to hold her hand. You are not just hardworking, you're beautiful, graceful. You have something many women don't have. Amaka quickly pulled her hand away, feeling a knot in her stomach. Sir, I think we should focus on the work, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Pastor John smiled softly, leaning back in his chair. Amaka, don't be so uptight. You know, in life, there are opportunities that come only once. You're in a position many people would do anything to have. Amaka didn't like the tone in his voice. Sir, I'm just here to do my job, she said firmly. Pastor John's smile faded slightly. Amaka, let me be clear with you. There are many beautiful ladies out there who are ready to do anything to take your position. If you want to keep your job, you should think about how to be flexible. Amaka felt her heart drop. Sir, I don't understand what you mean, she said, though deep down she knew exactly what he was saying. Pastor John gave a short laugh, his eyes cold. You're smart, Amaka. I'm sure you do. She stood up quickly. Sir, if there's nothing else, I'd like to get back to work. Pastor John's smile was gone now. He waved her off dismissively. Go, but think about what I said. Don't make me regret giving you this opportunity. Amaka walked out of the office, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't give in to his demands, but she also knew how much she needed this job. The firing and desperation. A week later, Amaka came to work as usual, only to find a letter waiting for her on her desk. It was short and cold. This is to inform you that your services are no longer required. Please return all company property immediately. Amaka's hand shook as she read the letter. She went to Pastor John's office to ask for an explanation, but his personal guard stopped her. He's busy, the guard said. Amaka left the church that day with her belongings in a small box. Tears filled her eyes as she walked down the road. She thought about her sick mother back in the village and how she would manage without a job. For weeks, Amaka searched for another job, but nothing came up. She felt trapped, angry, and helpless. Deep inside, she knew that Pastor John had fired her because she refused to play along with his games. It was a dark time for Amaka, but she promised herself one thing. She wouldn't give up. What she didn't know was that her story with Pastor John was far from over. The revenge plan. Weeks turned into months, and Amaka's life became harder every day. Her rent was due, and her mother's medical bills kept coming. She sat on her small bed, staring at her last few currency notes, wondering how she would buy food. Her phone vibrated, showing a low battery warning. She sighed, scrolling through her contacts, thinking of anyone she could call for help. There was no one. She thought of Pastor John and how he had fired her without mercy. Her anger boiled, but so did her desperation. The next morning, she put on her best dress and went to the church office. She was ready to swallow her pride. She waited in the reception area, her hands shaking. Finally, Pastor John stepped out of his office. He stopped when he saw her, raising an eyebrow. Amaka? What are you doing here? Good afternoon, sir, Amaka said, standing up. I need to talk to you. Pastor John looked around, then motioned for her to follow him into his office. He sat down, leaning back in his chair. I didn't expect to see you again. What do you want? Sir, I'm sorry for anything I might have done wrong. I really need my job back. Things are very hard for me, she said, her voice breaking. Pastor John smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. You see, Amaka, I gave you a good opportunity, but you didn't appreciate it. Do you know how many women would love to work for me? I understand, sir, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Please, sir, I'll do anything. His eyes lit up at those words. Anything, you say? He asked, leaning forward. Amaka nodded, her throat dry. She knew what he meant. All right, Pastor John said, his tone soft. You can have your job back. But you must promise to show me respect. No more acting like you're better than me. Do you agree? Yes, sir, she said, forcing herself to look him in the eye. Good, he said, standing up. Come back on Monday. And remember, Amaka, loyalty is everything. Amaka left his office, her heart pounding. She hated herself for agreeing to his terms, but she had no choice. This time, she told herself, she would be smart. She would keep records of everything. The secret meetings. It started with a phone call from Pastor John one evening after church. Amaka, he said, his voice smooth. I need to see you. Not at the office, somewhere private. Where, sir? She asked, pretending not to understand. I'll book a hotel room this evening. I'll text you the details. Her stomach turned, but she agreed. She needed to follow through with her plan. The first meeting was awkward. Amaka sat on the edge of the hotel bed, watching Pastor John remove his tie. You look tense, he said, sitting beside her. I'm fine, sir, she replied, forcing a smile. You don't need to call me sir here, he said, placing a hand on her knee. Relax. She nodded, swallowing her disgust. She reminded herself why she was doing this. Over the weeks, their meetings became a routine. After church services, Pastor John would call her and ask her to meet him at a hotel room. He would hand her envelopes of cash, saying, use this for your mother's treatment. But what shocked Amaka the most was his carelessness. He never asked for protection. I'm a servant of God, he would say with pride. God protects his own. Amaka wanted to laugh at his words, but she stayed quiet. She recorded their conversations on her phone, hiding the files in a secret folder. She also saved every text message he sent. At night, when she was alone, she would cry. She hated what she was doing, but her anger kept her going. He started this, she whispered to herself. I'll make him pay for everything. The scandal breaks. Grace, Pastor John's wife, sat in the living room one evening, watching her husband scroll endlessly on his phone. He had been doing that a lot lately. John, you've been on that phone all day, she said, trying to sound casual. I'm replying to church messages, he replied without looking up. Grace studied him. Something about his tone felt off. She had been noticing little changes, how he stayed out late after church, his sudden increase in meetings, and the way he avoided her questions. That evening, she decided to do something about it. The next day, Grace called Amaka into her office at the church. Amaka, sit down, she said, folding her arms across her chest. Amaka hesitated but sat. Good morning, Ma. Grace leaned forward. Amaka, I'm a woman, and I know when something is not right. There's something going on between you and my husband, isn't there? Amaka's heart skipped. Ma, I don't understand what you're talking about, she said, keeping her voice steady. Grace smirked. I see the way he looks at you, and I've noticed how uncomfortable you look around me. Let me warn you now, Amaka, if you're doing anything you shouldn't be doing, it will not end well for you. Amaka shook her head quickly. Ma, I respect you and Pastor John. I would never do anything to disrespect this family. Grace's eyes stayed fixed on her. I hope so, Amaka. Be careful. As Amaka walked out of the office, her hands trembled. She could feel the walls closing in. Grace didn't believe Amaka's denial. She had trusted her instincts for years, and they had never failed her. That evening, she called her friend, Sister Joy, for advice. Joy, I need your help. Something is going on with John, and I need to know the truth, Grace said. Grace, you need evidence before you confront him. Have you thought about hiring someone? Joy replied. The idea lingered in Grace's mind. The next morning, she made a call to a private investigator. The exposure. 2 weeks later, Grace received a phone call from the investigator. "Madam, I followed Pastor John to a hotel yesterday. He wasn't alone," the man said. Grace gripped her phone tightly. "Who is he with?" "The young lady that works as his assistant." The investigator sent Grace pictures, clear evidence of Pastor John entering the hotel with Amaka. Grace stared at the pictures that night, her emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. "So it's true," she whispered to herself. But she didn't act immediately. Instead, she decided to wait. She wanted the perfect moment to confront both of them. "John, you think you're smart?" she murmured, clutching the photos. "Let's see how smart you are when I'm done with you." Grace's plan was set, and the storm was coming. The downfall. Pastor John sat in his office one evening, looking at the mirror. He looked pale and tired. He had lost so much weight that even his favorite clothes no longer fit properly. He leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. Amaka walked in with some documents for him to sign. "Good evening, sir," she said, avoiding his eyes. "Leave them on the table," Pastor John said weakly, his voice rough. Amaka placed the papers down and hesitated. She could see the pain on his face and the way his hands trembled. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked quietly. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Why do you care? You just want your salary at the end of the month, don't you?" Amaka stepped back, shocked. "No, sir. I was only asking." He waved her off. "Go." As she left, Amaka couldn't shake off the guilt that had been building inside her. Pastor John's health was clearly failing, and while she didn't know the full reason, she suspected it was linked to their secret meetings. Later that night, as Amaka lay on her bed, her thoughts were racing. "What if it's because of me? What if I've caused this?" she whispered to herself. But then she remembered how he had treated her, how he had forced her into this situation. "He did this to himself," she muttered, trying to convince herself. But deep down, the guilt lingered. The public scandal. It was a bright Sunday morning, and the church was filled with people for a special meeting with the elders. Pastor John sat at the head of the table, trying to look composed despite his failing health. Amaka stood at the back of the room, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Grace suddenly burst into the room, her face filled with anger. "Excuse me, elders, but I have something important to show you," she said loudly. The room fell silent. Pastor John's face went pale as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Grace, what are you doing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Grace ignored him and handed a brown envelope to the head elder. "These are pictures of my husband, Pastor John, with this girl," she said, pointing at Amaka. Amaka froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The head elder opened the envelope and pulled out the photos. Shouts and murmurs filled the room as the elders looked at the pictures of Pastor John and Amaka entering and leaving a hotel. "Pastor John, what is this?" one of the elders asked, his voice serious. "It's not what it looks like," Pastor John said, rising to his feet. His voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. "These pictures don't prove anything." Grace laughed bitterly. "Really, John? So you think I'm blind? You think I don't know what you've been doing behind my back?" Amaka tried to speak. "Ma, it's not like that, Keep quiet." Grace snapped, looking at her. "You think I didn't notice the way you've been acting around him? You're just as guilty as he is." The room erupted into chaos as the elders argued over what to do next. Pastor John kept denying everything, but the evidence was too clear. Amaka stood there silently, tears streaming down her face, knowing her life would never be the same again. "Pastor John, you have brought shame to this church," one elder finally said. "We need to address this immediately." As Grace walked out of the room, she turned back to look at her husband. "You've destroyed everything, John. Everything." Amaka was at home washing clothes when she heard a loud knock on her door. She wiped her hands on her dress and went to open it. Standing outside were two police officers, looking very serious. "Are you Miss Amaka Okafor?" one of them asked. Yes, I am." "Is there a problem?" Amaka asked, her voice trembling. "You are under arrest for knowingly transmitting HIV to Pastor John," the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Amaka froze, the words hitting her like a blow. "What? Transmitting HIV? What are you talking about?" The second officer stepped forward. "We have a complaint from Pastor John. He claims you infected him deliberately." "That's not true. I didn't," Amaka stammered, her mind spinning. The first officer didn't wait for her explanation. He cuffed her hands. "You can explain at the station." Neighbors started gathering, whispering among themselves. "What is happening?" one woman asked. "Is that not Amaka? Why are they arresting her?" another murmured. Amaka looked around, her face burning with shame. "Please, let me grab my slippers," she begged. The officers ignored her and led her to the waiting police van. She struggled to keep her balance as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. At the station, Amaka sat in the interrogation room, her hands still cuffed. A senior officer walked in with a file and sat across from her. "Miss Okafor," he began, adjusting his glasses. "Pastor John claims you knew you were HIV positive and still had a relationship with him. Is this true?" Amaka's voice cracked as she answered. I never forced him. He didn't even ask for protection." The officer frowned. "So you admit there was a relationship?" Amaka hesitated, her heart pounding. She felt trapped. "Yes, but he's the one who The officer cut her off. "You had a duty to tell him your health condition. Why didn't you?" Tears streamed down Amaka's face. "I told him once. He didn't care. He said he was a man of God, that nothing could harm him." The officer leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Do you have any proof of this?" Amaka nodded quickly. "I have recordings. I saved messages. I knew something like this could happen." The officer raised his eyebrows. "Recordings?" "Yes. He forced me into this. I didn't want any of it." The officer stared at her for a moment, then stood up. "We'll need those recordings, Miss Okafor. For now, you'll remain in custody." As Amaka was led to a holding cell, her thoughts were a mix of fear and determination. Pastor John had turned the tables on her, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Deep down, she knew the truth would come out, and she would make sure of it. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as people filled the seats, eager to hear the case that had rocked the church and the entire city. Amaka sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling slightly. Her lawyer, Barrister Chukwu, leaned close to her. "Stay calm, Amaka," he whispered. "We have strong evidence. Just trust me." Across the room, Pastor John sat with his own lawyer, looking worn and frail. His wife, Grace, was seated in the audience, her face stiff with anger. The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court. We will now begin." Pastor John's lawyer was the first to speak. He painted a picture of Pastor John as a victim, a man deceived and betrayed by someone he trusted. "This is a case of deliberate harm," the lawyer said, pointing at Amaka. "The defendant knew her condition but kept it a secret, knowingly putting my client's life at risk. She manipulated him for her own gain." Amaka's heart pounded as the words sank in. When it was Barrister Chukwu's turn, he stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client is not the villain here. She is a victim of harassment, threats, and abuse of power. Pastor John used his position to manipulate her into a relationship." He held up a file. "We have text messages and voice recordings that show how Pastor John coerced Amaka into this relationship. Let me read one message." The courtroom fell silent as he read aloud. "Amaka, don't forget who gave you this job. If you want to keep it, you know what to do. Many girls would love to take your place." Shouts echoed in the room. Barrister Chukwu continued. "This is just one of many examples of how Pastor John abused his power." Next, he called the private investigator to the stand. The investigator explained how he had followed Pastor John and Amaka to multiple hotels, capturing photographs that confirmed their relationship. "Did my client ever initiate these meetings?" Barrister Chukwu asked. "No," the investigator replied. "Pastor John always arranged and paid for the hotel rooms." The judge nodded, taking notes. Then came the most shocking part. Barrister Chukwu called a young woman named Neka to the stand. She was nervous but determined. "Tell the court what happened between you and Pastor John," he said gently. Neka cleared her throat. "Pastor John did the same thing to me. He promised me a scholarship if I helped him with church work, but later, he started asking for things I didn't know how to say no to. I was scared." More women came forward, sharing similar stories. Each testimony damaged Pastor John's reputation. When Pastor John was called to testify, he looked pale. His lawyer whispered to him, but Pastor John shook his head and stood up. "I am a man of God," he said, his voice shaking. "These women are lying to destroy me." Barrister Chukwu didn't hesitate. "If you are a man of God, Pastor John, why did you meet Amaka in hotels? Why didn't you deny her accusations from the beginning?" Pastor John stammered. I was weak, but I didn't harm anyone intentionally." The tension in the room was thick as the judge called for a recess. Amaka sat quietly, holding back tears. Barrister Chukwu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've done well so far," he said. "Let's see how this plays out." As people filed out of the courtroom for the break, whispers and debates filled the air. The truth was coming to light, but the final verdict was still uncertain. The courtroom was quiet as Amaka's lawyer stood up with a file in hand. He looked directly at Pastor John. "Your Honor, it has come to our attention that my client, Amaka, is not the only woman who has had dealings with Pastor John. In fact, several women have stepped forward to share their stories." The crowd murmured in shock. Pastor John shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sweat gathering on his forehead. Barrister Chukwu continued, "Let me present testimony from these women." The first witness, a middle-aged woman named Chidinma, walked to the stand. She avoided eye contact with Pastor John as she spoke. "He promised to help me with my rent when I lost my job," Chidinma said, her voice shaking. "But instead, he asked me to repay him in a way that was wrong. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't lose my home." The second woman, Eno, followed. "He told me I was special and that God wanted me to be close to him. I believed him, but later, I realized he had told the same lies to other women in the church." One after the other, the women revealed their encounters with Pastor John. The court listened in silence, each story adding to the tension in the room. Then, Barrister Chukwu delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, we have medical evidence that several of these women tested positive for HIV before any interaction with my client. It is clear that Pastor John has been hiding his condition and spreading it to multiple victims." Pastor John's lawyer stood up, looking pale. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an attempt to slander my client." But the judge was firm. "Overruled. The testimonies are admissible." The church elders sitting in the courtroom looked horrified. One elder whispered to another, "This man has destroyed everything we stand for." Pastor John slumped in his seat, his head in his hands. His secrets were out, and the respect he once commanded was gone. The day of the verdict finally arrived. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. Amaka stood quietly, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure what to expect. The judge spoke slowly and clearly. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, this court finds no proof that Amaka intentionally infected Pastor John with HIV. The testimonies of other women and the medical reports have shown that Pastor John's condition predates his relationship with the defendant." There was a pause, and the judge continued. "Therefore, Amaka is found not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Some people cheered, others sat in shock. A few whispered angrily among themselves. Amaka's lawyer leaned over and whispered, "You're free now. It's over." Amaka let out a shaky breath. She had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Her life was forever changed, and the guilt of everything that had happened still weighed heavily on her. Pastor John, on the other hand, sat frozen in his seat. His congregation had turned against him, and he had lost everything: his reputation, his position, and his family. As Amaka walked out of the courtroom, she overheard people talking about the scandal. "Who would have thought Pastor John could do such a thing?" one woman said. Another added, "God doesn't sleep. What's done in the dark will always come to light." Amaka looked up at the sky, her heart heavy but her spirit determined. It was time to start over. She would never forget what happened, but she promised herself she would build a new life far away from the shadows of her past. Amaka's journey is a powerful reminder that life can take us through unexpected and painful paths, but every challenge comes with lessons to be learned. Through her experience, we see how power and trust can be misused by those in positions of authority and the devastating impact it can have on others. It's a cautionary tale for communities to hold leaders accountable and not blindly follow without question. Pastor John's downfall highlights the danger of living a double life and the consequences of dishonesty. No matter how much someone tries to hide their actions, the truth always has a way of coming out. His story also shows how unchecked power and manipulation can destroy lives, including the manipulator's own. Thank you so much for watching and joining me on this emotional journey. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that this story has left you thinking about the important lessons we can all learn from Amaka's experience. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be there to read them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more engaging and thought-provoking stories. Your support helps me bring even more stories like this to life. Until next time, stay safe and remain blessed.